The man who once made the entire planet feel every heartbeat of a drum break, the voice behind songs that define generations, now sits quietly in a Miami home and says the 4 words no fan ever wanted to hear. It isn't good. At 74 years old, Phil Collins has spent the last few years almost completely out of the spotlight. No tours, no new albums, barely any interviews. And when he finally decided to speak, what came out wasn't gratitude, wasn't nostalgia, it was something far heavier. For decades, we celebrated the hits, the comebacks, the impossible Live Aid flight across the Atlantic. But there's a side of his story most people never saw coming. A slow, relentless battle that took away the one thing he loved more than anything else in the world. This isn't just another "where are they now" story. This is the moment one of the biggest legends in music looked straight at his life and admitted the truth he'd kept quiet for years. And once you hear what he actually said and why he said it now, you'll never listen to "In the Air Tonight" the same way again. Ready? Let's go back to where it all began, long before anyone realized the price he'd eventually pay. A skinny kid in West London, barely 5 years old, unwrapping a beat-up old drum kit that his granddad had scrounged up from who knows where. That was Phil Collins in 1956, pounding away on those makeshift skins like they were the key to the universe. Growing up in a modest flat in Chiswick with the hum of the Thames not far off, Phil wasn't some prodigy handed silver spoons. He was just a boy obsessed. His mom, Winifred, worked as a theatrical agent, always hustling to get her son auditions, while his dad, Greville, crunched numbers as an insurance man, probably wishing his kid would pick a safer hobby. But Phil? He was hooked from the first thump. He'd mimicked the Beatles on the radio, air drumming to "She Loves You" until his arms ached, dreaming of stages bigger than the living room rug. By age 10, he was already juggling school plays and odd jobs, but music was the fire that wouldn't quit. It wasn't glamorous, it was gritty determination, the kind that turns a hobby into a lifeline. Fast forward to his teens, and Phil's channeling that energy into something more structured. He lands a spot at the Barbara Speake Stage School, this quirky place in Acton where kids learn to sing, dance, and act like pros. It's there, amid the tap shoes and fake spotlights, that he forms his first band, The Real Thing. They're a scrappy bunch of schoolmates covering Motown hits and mod anthems from groups like The Action, playing basement gigs that barely paid for bus fare. Phil's on drums, of course, his stick's a blur as he tries to capture that raw soul punch. But school's not just beats, it's a launch pad. At 13, he steps into the spotlight as the Artful Dodger in the West End production of Oliver. Yeah, that Oliver, the one with the pickpockets and poorhouses. There he is, dodging Fagin schemes night after night, sharing the stage with a young Jack Wilde who later hits big in movies. Phil's got the cheeky grin down pat, but underneath, he's itching for more. Acting pays the bills, commercials for sweets, bit parts in shows like Calamity the Cow, but it's the rhythm in his blood that's screaming loudest. He sneaks in drum sessions whenever he can, eyes on bands that actually make records, not just theater curtains. By the late 60s, Phil's ready to level up. He's 16, hormones raging, and he dives headfirst into the London rock scene. First up, Freehold, a short-lived outfit where he cuts his teeth on original tunes, gigging in smoky pubs to crowds who might cheer or throw peanuts, take your pick. It's chaotic, exhilarating, the kind of grind that weeds out the dreamers. But Phil sticks, honing that instinctive groove, the one that feels like conversation between heartbeats. Then comes the big swing, Flaming Youth, in 1969. They start as Hickory, a psychedelic trio with Phil on drums, but rebrand quick, chasing that flower power wave. Their album, Arc 2, drops that year, science fiction vibes with swirling guitars and Phil's precise, almost telepathic fills holding it all together. Critics give it a nod, calling it ambitious, but sales? Crickets. Live shows are sparse, the van tours endless, and frustration builds like a storm. Phil's 20, married to his childhood sweetheart Andrea Bertarelli, with a baby girl, Jolie, on the way. The pressure's real. Rent's due, dreams are fraying. He pores over Melody Maker classifieds, desperate for a break, any break. That's when he spots it, an ad from a band called Genesis, hunting for a drummer. They've got a rep in prog circles, Charterhouse schoolboys turned rock weirdos, but to Phil, it's just words on a page. He knows their manager, Tony Stratton-Smith, from bar chats at the Marquee Club. Worth a shot. The audition's a trip. It's August 1970, and Phil rolls up to their countryside pad, expected maybe a casual jam by the pool. Instead, he walks into a whirlwind. Mike Rutherford in a robe that looks like it survived a shipwreck, Tony Banks brooding like a poet mid-crisis, Peter Gabriel, all eccentric flair with stories that twist like vines. They've been through a dozen drummers already, sifting through hopefuls like gold in a river. Phil waits his turn, nerves buzzing, then unleashes on their tunes. The Knife, this jagged epic that demands everything. His style clicks, not flashy, but locked in, breathing with the song. They nail it together, that spark of chemistry no ad can fake. By August 20th, he's in. Genesis isn't huge yet. They're a prog outfit fresh off Trespass, touring in a battered van, sleeping on floors. But Phil feels it, the potential humming like a low tom. He dives deep, contributing to Foxtrot in '72, his parts on Supper's Ready weaving magic that elevates the whole beast. Fans start noticing. This new guy's got touch, soul, and the odd time signatures. And quietly, Phil's backing vocals sneak in, hinting at the voice waiting in the wings. It's the start of something seismic, a band on the cusp with a drummer who's more than sticks and skins. He's the pulse. Those early days with Genesis were a forge, hammering Phil into the musician who'd one day own arenas. They'd hole up in run-down studios, chasing sounds that bent reality, flutes wailing over bass pedals, lyrics painting dystopias. Phil's not just keeping time, he's inventing it, layering rhythms that feel alive, human. Take Nursery Crime, that '71 gem where he joins Full Tilt. His work on the musical box is pure invention, brushes whispering secrets before exploding into fills that chase ghosts. Offstage, it's brotherhood in the trenches, endless drives, shared smokes, arguments over chord changes that end in laughs. Phil is balancing fatherhood too. Another daughter, Simon, arrives in '74, but the road calls louder. Genesis climbs, selling England by the pound in '73 cements them as prog kings. Phil's beautiful drumming earning nods from Neil Peart himself. He idolizes the guy, but here's the twist. Phil is already influencing the influencers, his sound crisp yet warm like a hug from a storm. By '44, with The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, tensions simmer. Peter's theatrical flair clashes with the band's grind, and whispers of change float. Phil stays steady, the anchor, but you can sense it. The drummer's got stories of his own brewing, melodies that don't fit the suite. And just when Genesis hits stride, Peter Gabriel drops the bomb in '75. He's out, chasing solo dreams. The band's gutted, auditioning 400 singers, voices blending into a blur of no's. Desperation sets in. They're staring at collapse. Then Phil, ever the reluctant hero, steps up. "I'll give it a go," he says, microphone in hand, heart pounding. His first frontman show? A Lester Polly gig, voice raw but real, crowd stunned silent, them roaring. It's not seamless, doubts linger, Gabriel's shadow looms, but Phil's got grit, that everyman charm cutting through the prog haze. A trick of the tail follows, his vocals on ripples aching with unexpected depth. Suddenly, Genesis isn't just surviving, they're evolving, Phil's dual role sparking a new fire. But here's the undercurrent, the thread that fame starts to tug. Those drum kits aren't kind to hands or backs. Hours hunched over, touring's toll mounting unseen. The highs are electric, arenas filling, critics thawing, but the body's whispering warnings, faint at first, like a cymbal's distant ring. Little does Phil know, the very gift propelling him skyward is planting seeds of a fall that no chart topper can outrun. The '80s didn't creep up on Phil Collins. They detonated around him. By 1981, barely a year after he'd nervously grabbed the Genesis microphone, he was already burning the candle at both ends and in the middle. Genesis released Abacab, a deliberate pivot toward shorter, punchier songs that radio could actually play. Critics howled that they were selling out. Fans bought it anyway. The album went platinum in weeks. But while the band was figuring out how to stay relevant, Phil quietly slipped into a London studio after hours and recorded something no one saw coming. Face Value dropped in February 1981, and the world stopped spinning for a second when they heard the opening 30 seconds of In the Air Tonight. That gated reverb drum break, the one that sounds like a door slamming on every bad memory you've ever had, hit number 2 in the UK and refused to leave people's heads. The album was raw, bleeding. Tracks like I Missed Again and If Leaving Me Is Easy weren't polished pop. They were diary pages set to music. Andrea, his wife of 7 years, had left him in 1979, taking their 2 kids. Phil poured every ounce of that ache into the grooves. He later said he didn't even expect the record to chart. It went straight to number 1. Suddenly, he was everywhere. While still writing, touring, and co-producing Genesis, he was now a solo superstar. 1982 brought Hello, I Must Be Going, another platinum smash with the heartbreaking cover of You Can't Hurry Love that made teenage girls cry in shopping malls. Then, in 1984, he pulled off the impossible. He wrote and recorded Against All Odds, Take a Look at Me Now, in 2 days for a movie soundtrack. It became his first American #1 single. The Oscars invited him to perform it live. He said yes, of course. But the real madness came in 1985, July 13th, Live Aid. Phil finishes Genesis' set at Wembley, jumps on a Concorde that's waiting literally on the tarmac, flies across the Atlantic at twice the speed of sound, lands in Philadelphia, hops in a helicopter, and walks on stage with Led Zeppelin's remaining members to play drums in front of 90,000 people and a global audience of almost 2 billion. The footage still feels unreal. Sweaty, exhausted, grinning like a kid who stole Christmas, he grabs the sticks and locks in with Tony Thompson on Baby I'm Gonna Leave You. The newspapers the next day crowned him the king of the world. No Jacket Required came out 2 months later and sold 12 million copies in its first year. Sussudio, One More Night, Take Me Home, every single felt inescapable. He won the Grammy for Album of the Year, beating Prince, Whitney Houston, and Tears for Fears. At the ceremony, he thanked his kids, thanked the audience, and then thanked his ex-wife for leaving him, because without that pain, none of it would exist. The crowd laughed nervously. He wasn't joking. Money poured in. $40 million in touring and record sales in 1985 alone. He bought a mansion in Surrey, a fleet of vintage Ferraris, and enough studio gear to build his own Abbey Road. Genesis cashed in too. Invisible Touch in 1986 became their only American #1 album, powered by the title track and Land of Confusion, that creepy puppet video everyone remembers. Phil was now the face of 2 monster acts, writing hits in his sleep, producing Eric Clapton, co-writing with Earth, Wind & Fire's Philip Bailey on the #1 duet Easy Lover. He was 35 years old and untouchable. But here's what the magazine covers never showed. The body was already starting to rebel. Years of hunching over drum risers, leaning forward at impossible angles to reach the hi-hat, had quietly crushed the vertebrae in his neck. By the end of the Invisible Touch tour in 1987, he was waking up with numb fingers. Doctors told him it was just fatigue. Take some anti-inflammatories, rest a couple weeks. He laughed. Rest? He had another solo album due, another Genesis record, movie soundtracks, charity shows. Pain became background noise, like the hum of an amp you learn to tune out. And then there were the relationships crumbling faster than he could write songs about them. He married Jill Tailman in 1984, right at the peak of the madness. Their daughter Lily was born in 1989, the same year he released But Seriously, another global juggernaut with Another Day in Paradise,
a homeless anthem that made people uncomfortable on the dance floor. Behind the scenes, the marriage was already cracking. The road, the women, the endless adrenaline. Phil later admitted he wasn't there the way he should have been. Jill filed for divorce in 1994, and the British tabloids feasted for months, especially when they discovered he'd ended the marriage via fax while on tour. Yes, the infamous fax divorce. He insists the story got twisted, that it wasn't a cold two-line message, but the damage was done. The public turned on him overnight. The same guy who'd been on every magazine cover as the nicest man in rock suddenly became the punchline for every late-night host. By the early 90s, the backlash was brutal. Critics called him overexposed, soulless, the human equivalent of elevator music. Radio stations played him so much that people literally begged for mercy. He went from hero to punching bag in the space of a couple years. And instead of stepping back, he doubled down. Another Genesis album, another solo album, another tour. Because stopping felt like dying. The body, though, had other plans. The numbness in his hands turned into shooting pain. His left foot started dragging slightly when he walked. Doctors finally ordered scans. The verdict? A dislocated vertebrae in his neck had been pressing on nerves for years. In 2007, he had surgery to fix it. When he woke up, he couldn't feel the sticks in his hands. The operation saved his ability to walk, but the fine motor control in his fingers, gone. Just like that, the one thing he'd done since he was 5 years old, the gift that had given him everything, was slipping away. He kept touring anyway, taping the sticks to his hands with gaffer tape so they wouldn't fly across the stage. Fans thought it was a quirky stage prop. It wasn't. It was desperation. The 80s had given him the world on a platinum platter. The 90s and beyond would start taking it back, piece by piece. And the hardest losses were still waiting in the wings.
By the late 90s, the Phil Collins most people thought they knew, the grinning everyman in the pastel suits, had started to disappear in plain sight. He moved to Switzerland in 1994 to be closer to Jill and Lily after the divorce mess, hoping the quieter life would steady everything. It didn't. The tabloids still followed him like hounds, printing every rumor they could invent. He threw himself into work instead, a big band swing album called A Hot Night in Paris, Disney soundtracks that would eventually win him an Oscar for Tarzan's You'll Be in My Heart, and a Genesis reunion that never quite felt like the old days. The 1996 album, Dance Into the Light, tried to recapture joy, but you could hear the exhaustion between the lines. Critics shrugged. Fans bought it anyway, out of loyalty more than excitement. Then, in 2000, he met Oriane Seavey, a Swiss translator 22 years his junior, at a Genesis show. They married fast, had 2 sons, Nicholas in 2001, Matthew in 2004, and for a moment the headlines turned sweet again. Phil built a mansion on Lake Geneva, filled it with memorabilia, and told friends this was finally the calm after decades of storms. He even started talking about easing off the road. The body, however, kept sending invoices. The 2007 neck surgery was supposed to be the fix. Instead, it was the beginning of the end for his hands. Nerve damage spread like spilled ink. He couldn't hold a pen properly, couldn't button a shirt without help. Drumming became impossible. The 2010s opened with a cruel twist. Doctors discovered he also had type 2 diabetes that had gone undiagnosed for years. A foot infection in 2016 turned septic. Surgeons cut away dead tissue and warned him he was one bad episode away from losing the foot entirely. Then came the pancreas issues, the broken ribs from simple falls because his balance was shot, the hearing in his left ear that simply vanished one morning. Each new diagnosis felt like another door slamming shut. Alcohol, which had always been around on tour buses and backstage parties, became something he leaned on harder. By 2015, he was drinking a bottle of vodka before noon some days. In his 2016 memoir, Not Dead Yet, a title that felt more like a plea than a joke, he finally admitted it.
He had been in the grip of addiction for years. He checked into a clinic in 2016, got sober, and told the world he was done performing for good. The announcement barely made a ripple. People had already started writing his musical obituary. But Phil being Phil, he couldn't stay away completely. In 2015, he announced the Not Dead Yet comeback tour. Fans lost their minds. Tickets sold out in minutes. He walked on stage in 2017 with a cane, sat the entire show, and let his son, Nick, then only 16, play every drum part. Watching Nick nail the "In the Air Tonight" Phil while Phil sang the words was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. Critics called it dignified. Phil called it survival. The tour rolled through 2019, grossing over $100 million, but every night you could see the toll. He'd finish shows, go back to the hotel, and cry from the pain. His left foot had started to turn inward permanently, drop foot, so he wore a brace under the trousers. Between songs, he'd joke about being a bit wobbly, and the audience would laugh with him, but the laughter always caught in their throats. Then, in 2021, Genesis announced one final tour, The Last Domino. It was supposed to be a victory lap. Instead, it became a public farewell to everything he used to be. Opening night in Birmingham, Phil sat center stage in a chair, microphone trembling slightly in his hand, while Nick and touring drummer Daniel Pierce handled the kit. When they played No Son of Mine, the camera zoomed in on Phil's face during the line, "I can't walk, I can't talk anymore," and half the arena started crying. The London shows in March 2022 were the last. At the O2 Arena on March 26th, he told the crowd, "This is the end for me with Genesis. I'm 71. My kids are grown. It's time." The lights came up, he waved from the chair, and 20,000 people stood in stunned silence before the applause finally broke like a wave. He meant it this time. No more encores. But even retirement couldn't shield him from the next round of pain. And this time, it wasn't just physical.
The house in Miami was supposed to be the safe harbor. After the final Genesis curtain fell in 2022, Phil moved full-time into the waterfront mansion he'd quietly bought years earlier. No more tour buses, no more sound checks at 4 in the morning, just warm sun, the soft slap of waves against the dock, and time with his two youngest boys. Nicholas, now 24, and Matthew, 20, were the center of his world. He watched Nick become one of the most sought-after drummers on the planet, filling seats his father could no longer fill, and it made him prouder than any #1 single ever had. Lily, his daughter from the second marriage, was lighting up Hollywood with Emily in Paris and a dozen magazine covers, carrying the Collins name in lights again. For the first time in 50 years, Phil Collins didn't have a deadline. And then, in 2019, everything he thought he had rebuilt collapsed overnight. Orion, the wife who had pulled him out of the darkest stretch of the 2000s, secretly remarried a much younger musician in Las Vegas while still living in Phil's Miami house. When he found out, he asked her to leave. She refused. What followed was a brutal, headline-splashing legal war. She claimed half the house was hers. He said she had taken advantage of his declining health. Armed security teams were called in, yes, actual armed guards, to remove her and her new husband from the property in 2020. The tabloids went feral. Phil's $40 million eviction nightmare. Ex-wife barricades herself in rockstar mansion. Court documents leaked, texts, accusations, millions in legal fees. Phil, who had spent his life trying to be the nice guy, was painted as the ruthless millionaire kicking out the mother of his children. He won the house back in the end, but the victory felt hollow. Friends say he sat alone on the balcony for weeks, staring at the ocean, barely speaking. The man who once filled stadiums couldn't even fill the silence in his own home. Then came the reconciliation nobody saw coming. In 2022, after 2 years of venom, Orion moved back in.
They never remarried, but they started calling each other partners again. Paparazzi caught them holding hands at Nick's gigs. The boys were thrilled to have both parents under one roof. Phil told one close friend, "I just want peace before it's over." Outsiders called it complicated. He called it family. That fragile peace is what makes the last few years so quietly devastating. Nick is now the drummer for his dad's legacy, literally. When Mike Rutherford and Tony Banks decided to tour Genesis material again in 2025 under the name Genesis: The Final Chapter, Nick took the drum throne while Phil watched from the side of the stage in a wheelchair, smiling like a proud dad at a school play. Lily flies in whenever she can, posts throwback photos on Instagram with captions that break a million hearts. "My hero, always." The kids have become his armor and his oxygen. But armor doesn't stop the body from breaking. In July 2025, a routine knee replacement turned into a nightmare when infections set in. He spent weeks in the hospital. False rumors exploded online that he was in hospice, that the end was days away. AI-generated images, some showing him on a deathbed with Paul McCartney at his side, went viral before anyone bothered to check. His management had to put out a rare statement. "Phil is home recovering. Reports of hospice care are completely false and incredibly cruel." The internet didn't care about the correction. The damage was done. Millions of fans spent a weekend grieving a man who was very much alive, just exhausted. That was the moment the phrase started circulating again. "It isn't good." He said it first in a February 2025 interview with Mojo magazine, the one everyone is talking about now. When the writer asked if he missed making music, he paused for a long time and answered, voice low, "I've been sick. I mean, very sick. The hunger isn't there anymore. It isn't good." No anger, no self-pity, just a flat, honest recognition that the fire is out. In the December 2024 documentary, Phil Collins, Drummer First, you can see him watching old concert footage of himself destroying a drum solo in 1986. He starts to cry, not dramatically, just quiet tears rolling down as he whispers to the screen, "I can't believe that was me." Those two moments, the Mojo quote and the documentary, are the closest thing we've had to a final statement. And that's what makes the whispers so loud right now. Because for the first time in his life, Phil Collins isn't promising he'll be back. But there's one more chapter the rumor mill never saw coming.
The whispers started as faint echoes, the kind that bounce around fan forums and late-night Reddit threads, but by mid-2025, they had swelled into a roar that even Phil Collins couldn't ignore. It began innocently enough, or at least that's how these things often do. In February, that Mojo magazine interview dropped like a quiet bomb. Phil, sitting in his Miami living room with the ocean view framed behind him, fielded questions about Genesis' 50th anniversary reissues and whether he'd ever dust off the sticks for one last jam. His answer wasn't defiant or wistful, it was stark. "I've been sick," he said, the words hanging heavy. "I mean, very sick. The hunger isn't there anymore. It isn't good." The reporter noted how his eyes drifted to a framed photo of the band in their prime, mid-80s, all shoulder pads and unscarred hands. No tears, no dramatic pause, just a man stating facts, like reading a weather report for a storm that's already passed. Fans latched onto it immediately. "It isn't good" trended for a day, dissected in comment sections. Was this code for something terminal? A subtle goodbye? Or just the blunt honesty of a guy who'd spent decades sugarcoating pain in 3-minute choruses? Phil had always been the accessible one, the drummer who became a singer without losing his everyman edge. But this felt different, unguarded, like the filter had finally slipped. Social media lit up with tributes, people posting grainy VHS clips of Live Aid, captioned, "Still feels good to us." Others shared stories of how, against all odds, got them through their own heartbreaks, wondering if Phil's words were a mirror held up to his. Then came the documentary, Phil Collins' Drummer First, which premiered in December 2024 but kept resurfacing in early 2025 playlists. Directed by someone who'd shadowed him for years, it wasn't a glossy retrospective, it was intimate, almost uncomfortably so. There he was, wheeling around his home studio, surrounded by gold records gathering dust. The camera caught him attempting to grip a pair of drumsticks. His fingers, gnarled from nerve damage, refused to cooperate. He dropped them twice before laughing it off, but the laugh didn't reach his eyes. "It's still sinking in," he admitted, voice cracking just a fraction. "I've spent all my life playing drums, and now I can't." Nick, his son, sat nearby, offering that easy grin of youth, but even he looked away when Phil confessed the frustration of watching old footage. The film cut to a 1986 solo from the No Jacket Required tour, Phil's arms a whirlwind, sweat flying like confetti. Cut back to now, him mouthing the lyrics silently, as if willing the ghost of that energy to return. The doc hit streaming platforms right as the rumors were simmering, and suddenly, Phil Collins' "can't drum" became a search term, spiking harder than "in the air tonight" lyrics during a breakup binge. Viewers flooded YouTube with reaction videos, many tearing up at the sight of him seated on stage during Genesis's farewell, Nick seamlessly taking over the fills. "It's like watching your dad hand over the keys to the family car," one commenter wrote, racking up thousands of likes. Phil's team stayed mum at first, letting the film speak for itself. But privately, sources close to him said it was cathartic, a way to close the book without slamming it shut. By spring, the online chatter had evolved into something sharper. Genesis announced a limited reissue of The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, their 1974 Prague masterpiece, with bonus tracks and remastered sleeves. Press events were scheduled in London and New York, but Phil skipped them all. Health reasons, the statement read, terse and official. Photos from the launches showed Peter Gabriel looking spry, Tony Banks reflective, Mike Rutherford cracking dad jokes, but the empty chair next to them spoke volumes. Fans speculated wildly. Was he too frail, bitter about the band's post-Collins plans, or had the Mojo words been a veiled exit sign? Summer brought the real firestorm. In July, after that knee surgery we'd whispered about earlier, the one meant to ease the constant ache in his legs, things took a turn. Phil ended up hospitalized for complications, a routine procedure twisting into weeks of IVs and monitors. Word leaked slowly at first, a blurry paparazzi shot of an ambulance outside his Miami place, then a vague post from a neighbor about all the fuss. By the time his rep issued the denial, the internet had already built a narrative. "Phil Collins in hospice care," screamed the headlines on gossip sites. Fake images flooded TikTok, AI-generated scenes of him frail in a hospital gown, surrounded by family, or worse, alone with a stack of unsold platinum records. One viral clip even photoshopped Paul McCartney at his bedside, the two icons sharing a final drum circle in the clouds. It was absurd, cruel, the kind of digital voodoo that preys on our worst fears. His spokesperson fired back quick. "Phil is home and recovering well. Stories of hospice care are completely incorrect and, frankly, devastating to him and his family." But the damage lingered. Talk shows picked it up. Jimmy Fallon did a gentle bit, playing "You'll Be in My Heart" over a montage of Phil's Disney days. Charity auctions for his Little Dreams Foundation saw bids skyrocket, fans donating in his name like it was a last rites collection. Phil himself broke radio silence with a single Instagram post from Lily, a family photo on the beach, him in sunglasses and a loose shirt, arm around Matthew, his youngest. The caption? "Grateful for these moments, music forever." No mention of the lies, just a quiet reclaiming of the narrative. Autumn quieted the storm, or so it seemed.
Whispers turned to tributes when the Phil Collins Story, a multimedia docu-concert blending his hits with archival footage, kicked off its North American tour announcement. 50 cities in 2026, starting in Niagara Falls, with live bands nailing those gated drums and projections of Phil in his prime. He wasn't performing, but his voice narrated snippets, warm and wry. "I didn't set out to be this," he quipped in one trailer, "but damn if it wasn't fun." Fans snapped up pre-sale tickets, turning it into a pilgrimage. In November, a surprise email blast went out. Tickets for his official farewell tour, Still Not Dead Yet, Farewell, on sale December 1st. Not him on stage, mind you, Nick fronting an all-star lineup, but Phil's sign-off, projected huge, promising one last lap around the world, proceeds funneled to music education, his way of saying, the beat goes on, even if his can't. And then, just days ago, on December 1st, the photo that melted the noise. Matthew, turning 21, posted it. Phil at his son's pro soccer match in Miami, the two of them grinning ear to ear on the sidelines. Phil in a polo and cap, looking tanned and steady, no wheelchair in sight, just a proud dad with a foam finger. Best supporter in the stands, the caption read. Likes poured in, Lily commented hearts and "This makes me so happy." Nick dropped a simple red emoji. It was ordinary, human, the kind of snapshot that cuts through the myth-making. No stages, no scandals, just a family reclaiming their story from the rumor machine. Those words from Mojo, "It isn't good," echo differently now. They're not a full stop, they're a comma in a sentence that's still unfolding. Phil's health remains a patchwork of recoveries and setbacks, the drop foot that demands braces, the hearing that's faded to one side, the hands that betray him at the piano. But in the gaps, there's this. Quiet mornings with Oriane brewing coffee, Nick sending clips of new drum sessions, Lily's calls from set with inside jokes from To the Bone rehearsals. He's not chasing charts or encores anymore. Instead, he's curating the archive, overseeing reissues, greenlighting that Broadway run of his story at San Francisco's Current Theater next year, where actors will channel his 80s swagger under spotlights he once owned. The rumors? They faded to background hum, replaced by something more potent, curiosity about what comes next. Will there be a memoir sequel to Not Dead Yet, spilling the untold bits from the Miami eviction saga? A collaboration with Nick on a father-son album, drums traded for spoken word overlays? Or just silence, the luxurious kind, where a man listens to the waves and lets the world spin without him? Phil Collins broke his silence, not to confess defeat, but to redraw the map of his life. Fame's peaks, the unseen valleys, and the stubborn spark that refuses to gutter out. In the end, It Isn't Good wasn't about surrender. It was permission to grieve the drummer he was, to cherish the father he's become, and to remind us all that even legends get to rewrite their endings on their own terms. Now, pulling it all together, from that wide-eyed kid in Chiswick to the icon who flew across oceans for a drum fill, Phil's path was never linear. It twisted through heartbreak and highs, surgeries and stadiums, divorces and duets that mended what fame tore apart. We've walked the early sparks, the solo surge, the fractures that hid in plain sight, the shadowed comebacks, the family that held him steady, the whispers he finally voiced. And through it, the music endured, a thread of rhythm tying it all. But here's the thought that lingers long after the final note. What if the real genius
wasn't the hits or the hustle, but the honesty to say when enough's enough? Phil Collins didn't just break silence, he reshaped it, turning "It Isn't Good" into a bridge, not a wall. Next time you queue up In the Air Tonight, listen closer. That build, that release, it's not just a song, it's a life, raw and relentless, inviting you to feel the weight and the wonder. What's your Phil Collins story? Drop it in the comments. Let's keep the conversation beating. And if this hit home, smash that like, subscribe for more Untold Legends, and share with a friend who needs a reminder. Sometimes the encore is just living well. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.